Yeah. It messed up my.
Every time.
We live.
We live.
Messed up my
Okay.
countdown.
Lord. Okay. Oh. Should I just go right to it? Yeah. They can catch up later. Welcome, everyone. It's time for Who Watch. Time and Relative Blackness in Space.
We have a special live episode today where we will be discussing critical fandom in a new area of Doctor Who, drawing both from our reflections on Series 14 and some of the brilliant essays in Adventures Across Space and Time, a Doctor Who reader.
Adventures Across Space and Time is an anthology published in November 2023 that brings together key academic, critic, and fan writings about Doctor Who. Because critical fandom is what we do at BNC, our conversation will focus on Section 3 of the anthology, Doctor Who Fandom in the 21st Century.
This section was curated and edited by Joy Piedmont, co-producer of the Reality Bomb podcast, and one of our three special guests this afternoon. We'll also be joined by media critic, fanfic enthusiast, and co-host and executive producer of the Wibbly Wobbly Timey Wimey podcast, Talia Frank, who authored the essay Forks in the Fandom Road, Divergent Views on the Social Politics of Doctor Who, as well as Amanda-Rae Prescott, who authored the essay Space Isn't Always for Everyone, How Unconscious Racial Bias in Doctor Who Scripts Affects Fan Perception of Companions of Color. Amanda is a freelance journalist for Den of Greek and GBH Drama, a regular Doctor Who convention panelist and moderator, and the occasional podcast guest. And yes, as Amani says, and the talent, like I was reading these essays this week, and I was like, the intro and the framing of like, there's never really been an anthology like this, and like the Who is doing history. Crazy. So thank you. The talent, I love it. We're so glad you're here.
These are all members of our community, so that's what's extra amazing about this. So we wanted to put this episode together because we're all really proud of the work that our friends and fellow creators have done, and because it helps remind folks that fandom is expansive, and this is true for all properties, but especially for Doctor Who. Even when new episodes aren't airing, there's other official content being published, lots of fan-made content being shared, and critical discussions happening in fandom space, like our BNC Discord community, which again, everyone here is a part of. And we hope that between now and the next Christmas special, folks feel empowered to engage in fandom in multiple ways, and that our conversation inspires you to think about the property in new ways.
Awesome. So we're going to have some time discussing with each of our guest speakers, kind of one-on-one, and at the end we'll come back together for open fandom discussion. Definitely share your responses in in the chat, things that come up, and during that open fandom discussion section, we would love to know your responses to some of the questions that we are asking as well. So we are going to get started with Joy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I know folks are excited to get into the context of the anthology, like into the content, of the anthology. But some, if they are like me, may also be curious about the construction of the text, the process of it all. We're curious what you can share with us about how the collection came about, the process of putting together a work like this, and when you were brought in to be a volume editor.
So it was sometime during the pandemic. I feel like it was definitely fall 2020, probably, because it felt especially like dark days. Paul Booth and I are friends. We co-run or co-chair the academic track of talks at Gallifrey One, the annual convention in Los Angeles for Doctor Who. And we've been friends for probably almost a decade now. Oh gosh, that's such a long time. And he had been thinking about putting together basically a reader that would kind of span a lot of different facets of fandom to coincide with the show's 60th anniversary. And we were just on a phone call, just a normal, like, friend chat that we were having. And he said, I'm working on this thing and I was wondering if you'd be interested in helping to edit one of the sections. We had been talking a lot about just some of the things that I was thinking about seeing in fandom, particularly around the time of June 2020, when BNC helped sponsor the blackout that we did in response to some of the tweet-alongs that were happening. And one of the things I was noticing is that there really seemed to be a really big rift between the way that fans interacted in the show based on geography. So, fans in England had a very different perspective than fans in the US and North America, but then also generationally, there were really huge differences in the way that people were viewing and interacting with the show just based on their reaction to one story, or 2 episodes of this show. And the response was so vast. I was like, wow, this is really weird. And someone should really be thinking about this. Not me, but somebody should be thinking about it. And so Paul and I are on the phone in the fall, and he's like, I was thinking a lot about what we've been discussing in terms of the geography and all of that. And he's like, do you want to do a section kind of about that? And I was like, I don't know, maybe. But I was also really tired because I'm a teacher, and the pandemic was not fun for teaching. And so I was like, I don't know. And he's like, well, you're not writing the whole thing. You just have to edit. And he's like, I'd really appreciate having your perspective. So I said yes, thinking, well, it's 3 years from now. Surely this will not take up that much time. And it didn't, but also it was a lot of work. So during those 3 years, basically from that conversation to publication, we did a call for papers. We then read proposals. And then after proposals, we had a first submission deadline when drafts were due. After that, I gave feedback. We looked at them again, and then it was just copy editing and making sure that everything looked okay for the volume. And then it went to print, and we did all that. They had a really cool signing at Gallifrey one, a few months ago that I couldn't attend because I was working. But it's been a really great process. And my section has probably the most original work to the volume because it's in the title, it's fandom in the 21st century. And I specifically wanted work that was new for this volume because I think that so much of the conversation is ongoing, and that we're still having these conversations in our fan spaces, but not as much necessarily as happening in these more academic spaces yet. And it's not to say that it's never happening, but I really wanted to bring in the voices of, my community and my friends, because I felt like, well, this is where the interesting conversation is happening, right? In spaces like BNC. And so that felt really important to me.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't realize that you were really sort of a part of this from the beginning, which is very cool to be there from conception throughout. And I know you mentioned there were a lot of things that were exciting about the curation of this and you knowing who you wanted to pull in and these things, but was there also a kind of daunting phase of that, or just what was it? I'm curious about what it was like to curate this section, given its space in the broader Who fandom. And for more explanation there, in the framing of the anthology throughout the book, it does a really good job of being Doctor Who fandom is large, really, really large. Sorry, at a hitchhiker's moment, but it's very, very big. It's big. So, and it really is people have been writing about this book or this movie, this TV show since the 60s. It has since become books, movies, comics, etc. And they've been writing about it in fandom spaces and academic spaces. So there's this sort of fandom heritage kind of that it's placed within. But then there's also the recognition that within that space, a lot of those texts, not all perspectives are represented, right? And so it's one way it feels like heritage, and the other way it feels no, I'm I'm new here, and that my voice is new here, and I'm coming in this space. And so I was just thinking about the task of curating that and making that space. Did the experience, and you've talked a little bit actually about how it started to inform your fandom, but just want to know if you want to expand on that. Yeah, and if there was something about this section that felt sort of high pressure.
I love this question because I think that there is a lot about this that kind of came out of my personal experience with fandom, and then also kind of informed the way that I think about fans and fandom generally. You know, there is some overlap. So because we kind of each worked individually, there's 4 editors on this work. Paul Booth was the lead on it. Matt Hills has a section, and Tansy Rayner Roberts has a section. So we were each covering different facets of just Doctor Who and Doctor Who fans. And so, you know, Matt's really thinking about audiences. Paul kind of took a more general approach and just thinking about like trans media, that kind of thing. And Tansy's thinking about like fans turned into pros and just the way that Doctor Who fandom influenced people's professional paths. So there is a ton of crossover. There are definitely particularly in Matt's section, because he's thinking about fans specifically. I think that there are essays there where I'm like, oh, that feels really similar to something that I have going on in my section, but just from like a different approach. So that's kind of interesting. And there are people actually, like there are writers, I'm thinking like, I was like, oh, that's so cool that they're in this. I'm glad they're here. I was hoping that, you know, maybe I would be able to get something from them. I'm glad it's here regardless. But, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I think what was really important to me was to get younger voices and also to represent the fact that, like, I think North American fans, and I think specifically like Black North American fans, don't often necessarily get to be heard in this way on Doctor Who, whereas there's a lot of opportunities in England for UK fans. And I think they're finally, like, if you're looking at any of the promotion for the official show recently in the past year, like they clearly made an effort to find non-white fans to help like promote the show, because they're realizing, oh, we have a Black Doctor and like we want a younger audience, and that younger audience definitely does not want to just see the same, you know, 2 white people over and over again, which is kind of what it was. So the official show has caught up, but then there is still, right, this gap of opportunity for North American fans of color. Ty Gooden did a really great TARDIS talk for the academic talks we do, like it was pre-pandemic, maybe it was 2019 or 2020. And she talked a lot about how, right, there are opportunities that North American fans of color do not get simply because of geography. And so I really wanted to help kind of like bridge that gap as well. And then just to get to the last piece of your question, I think part of editing this section, I definitely took a step back from participating in like general fan spaces. Like I like having conversations with you all in the Discord. I like having conversations with like the friends I have like in my group chats and whatever. But having those public discussions just got less and less fun. And I think spending a lot of time thinking about, particularly like, I mean, I know we'll talk to Amanda and Talia, but the work that they think about in their essays, it just got increasingly, and then with Twitter changing over into like even a worse place, it kind of made me realize like this is not always going to be the thing that I want it to be. And so I should probably take a step back. And like after I've done all this thinking about the ways that, you know, this is not always great for us, like I think like maybe I need to you know, maybe be less of a participant and more of an observer.
Yeah, that's very fair. In the introduction to the section, you note that critical fandom is default for the generation of Whovians, but at BNC, we are often having to explain what that means when we use the term. So how do you think the essays in this section help to define and distinguish critical fandom?
Well, this is also a great question. One of the things that I realized I did as I was rereading my intro, because I wrote it a really long time ago, is that I don't define what critical fandom is in my intro. And I stand by that. Paul and I never had a discussion about it. So I submitted my I submitted my introduction, and at no point did he say, hey, you might need to define this. And it didn't occur to me that I would need to. And clearly he didn't think it needed to be there. But now I'm realizing, like, oh, I think my hope, right, is that in looking at the various essays in the section that people will understand, like, the way that fans now, especially fans who are like very online people, right, are engaging with the show is to, like, the way that we love it is to pick it apart.
Yep.
Like, just because there are things that we're seeing in it that we're like, ooh, that doesn't seem great. Let's examine this. Let's like go further into this. Let's think about what are ways that it could have been better. Doesn't mean that we don't love the show, right? If you don't love the show, you're just not going to watch, right? And that happened for a lot of people. And that has happened. Like, when you stop loving the show, people just kind of stop talking about it and they kind of retreat and they go away. If you're still engaging with it and having these discussions and really wanting the show to do better, it means you really, really care about it. And I think sometimes folks on the outside see that and think like, oh, these people just like are never happy. Like, they just want everything to be better. Like, why can't they just be happy with the things that we give them? And it's like, no, we love it. We love the show. We wanted to do better. And I'm hoping that that's what comes through, because it's not just the pieces in the section about race and representation, but I think there's also just ways, like, there's one of the essays is about queering Doctor Who ships, right? And creating ships where there weren't any before. And so, right, it's a critique in the way that the fans are engaging with it without being necessarily like, we think that this is a bad thing happening on the show. It's just showing like the creativity of fans and the ways that they can find ways to make space for themselves, to see themselves, even if it's not already there in the show. And that feels like such a cornerstone of critical fandom.
And I loved, and we're going to talk, I think, a bit more about this closer to the end, but just the essay around Chinese fans and their like fan translation, the work that goes into that, right? Like, that's labor of love. Like, you do not take the time to go through an entire show and do all that if you don't really care about it and if you don't want to build community around it. So I appreciate your naming of that and setting the space of like, critical fandom does not mean, oh, these people just hate the thing and they don't care about the thing. Like, no, we're putting time and effort and attention into these conversations and the space and the work that we do.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you, Joy. We're going to bring up Talia, one of our writers here, but Joy will be back for our open fan discussion at the end. So thank you, Talia, for joining us.
Hi,
Talia.
Thank you for having me.
So your essay discusses divergent views on social politics in the show. What was it like to take on the task of researching this piece? Were there any perspectives or opinions that were new and or challenging for you?
Yeah, so I had a few different strategies for researching this piece. One of the primary ones is that I reached out into the broader BNC network, and then also other fans that I know of Doctor Who, and from a variety of different racial, ethnic, gender, orientation, ability, all the different things. I tried to be as expansive as possible in who I reached out to. At the same time, I can't talk to the whole depth and breadth of the Doctor Who fandom. So it ended up being not a whole lot of people. Mostly what I did was I reached out and asked the people that I did, I said, hey, can I email you a list of questions about how you feel about Doctor Who and the direction it's going in and where it's been, its future, and what your sort of greater opinion is of the fandom as well. So I sent out a lot of emails, did a lot of outreach via Twitter back before, I don't use Twitter very much anymore. But one of the things that I did also do for this was I did go through Twitter and look at what a lot of people were seeing, because one thing that was kind of missing from all the people I selected from, like I said, I reached out to my broader network, but that means that there are lots of people that I did not reach, including a lot of people who definitely disagree with me and disagree with a lot of the people that I interviewed about the direction that Doctor Who is going in and where it's been and its trajectory, right? Because there's so many people who, despite claiming to love Doctor Who, spend a lot of time hating it, and not hating it in the critical fandom way that we were just discussing, like hating it where we like there are things that we dislike, but we always speak about it from a place of love. I'm talking about the people who will just outright tear apart everything and see no good in it whatsoever and criticize it because it's like, oh no, there's Black people, like we can't handle that, right? We can't handle having a woman as the Doctor. We can't handle having a Black man as the Doctor. Like, what's this? Like, multiple companions that aren't white, like that's the worst. So it's like, I don't really want to talk to those people very much. It's not like something that I enjoy doing. It's not my biggest love when it turns to talking to people about fandom and Doctor Who. And it's honestly kind of tricky too when I meet people in person and I'm like, oh, I love Doctor Who. And I was like, okay, so what kind of love do you have for Doctor Who? Like, which doctors do you love and why? And which doctors will you dislike and why? And that really informs for me a lot of how I feel about the show and when I look into it. And so that is actually one of the things that ended up being not an issue exactly, but it ended up being that I had a lot of personal accounts from people who were a very similar viewpoint for me in terms of the divergent politics of Doctor Who, and then trying to find people who I disagreed with, and also trying not to platform, like transphobes and racists and misogynists and all that. But also I needed to include some of what they were saying if I was going to be, more well-rounded about this. So that was one thing. Is I do kind of wish I'd gotten more, like, on the one hand, I wish I got more personal, like, accounts from people who I disagreed with. And on the other hand, like, that's really toxic to have to read through. So I often struggled with that, but I did really appreciate getting to talk to people that I did talk to and getting to hear their different perspectives, because there are so many ways to love Doctor Who. And I loved really getting to talk to people about that. And that's sort of where I was coming from. Also, I will say it was all entirely done online. I did not get to do any like in-person interviews or anything. Most of the people I talked to, I've never actually met in person.
That's the next step.
Yeah, well, it's because I run to people from so many different time zones and so many different, like, multiple different countries. Like, it was just doing all the interviews over email ended up being what was easiest.
Yeah. Now I appreciate that. I appreciate the reflection on sort of, what is disagreement and what is harm. And what, and knowing where to, pull in things for critique and what just doesn't necessarily need to take up space is absolutely a skill, navigating fandom in this way. So really appreciate your reflections on that. And I'm curious, given, the folks from different places, folks who are presumably experiencing fandom in different ways, were there any surprising kind of points of alignment, like perspectives that people shared? I know you said a lot of them agree with you on a lot of things, but sort of specific to the show, things that people are looking forward to seeing or want to see less.
Yeah, so I will say that in terms of alignment, one thing that was very much true of pretty much everyone that I talked to was that they have liked Doctor Who increasing the diversity, increasing the inclusion, being more progressive in terms of how it deals with issues. And pretty much everyone who, when that was touched upon, the response was, Doctor Who's been making strides, but they've also made mistakes and can do better. And so I will say another thing that was very interesting about this piece is that I wrote it almost entirely before Ncuti was announced as the next Doctor. So Ncuti's announcement was like really big, but also something that I could not incorporate as much of into the essay as possible. Like I had already submitted the entire essay, like I was done, and then he was announced and I was like, oh man. So like I rewrote my conclusion. And it is something that I kind of wish I'd been able to address more, because I have a lot of mixed feelings about his portrayal as the Doctor. And I know that a lot of us are feeling that. I mean, one thing we can agree on is the acting. Like, it's next level. He's amazing. A lot of the way he's written sometimes bothers me. But one thing I did notice whenever I talked to anyone, it was generally just the excitement about Doctor Who, and the excitement, and also in some cases trepidation about where we're going, because it's very exciting to have a Black Doctor as a full-time doctor, but there's also, again, like many pitfalls that we have to deal with whenever we are witnessing a diversity on screen, and perhaps not on the back end as much.
That leads right into kind of the next question, which is, like, we appreciate the way that you make it clear that representation through diversity in casting is political, and it can require intentional engagement with experiences the show has ignored before. So, in which characters and/or series do you feel most represented as a fan? And is there anywhere you feel strongly misrepresented?
Yeah, so I would say the first time that I ever felt truly represented by Doctor Who was with Bill Potts as being a full-time companion. Bill is still to this day one of my favorite companions. I have 3 different Bill Potts cosplays. Like, I just love her so much, and I love her for a lot of reasons, but also because when she was the companion is when I was really figuring out a lot. I was in college and I was figuring out a lot about my own queer identity, and I was figuring out a lot about how I felt about people and moving through the world. And it ended up being because, like, through Bill, I finally got to have, like, my Black queer companion on screen with her natural hair, which was honestly, I loved so much, because especially in that era of my life, I was wearing, like, most of the time my hair was an afro. And I've always worn my hair, not always, but most of the time I wear it curly. And I do occasionally, like, get a silk press, or, like, wear a wig, or do, like, braids, but for the most part, especially in that era of my life, I was almost always, like, just having my hair in its natural curls. And that was a really big deal for me to see that on screen, and to see her really also, like, learning about herself, and, like, learning from the Doctor as a and they had that, like, mentor-mentee relationship. And, like, again, like I said, it was all, like, I was in college at the time, like, I was definitely aligned very well with Bill. And I will say that that all that said, part of the reason that I love Bill so much, and she's so dear to me, and also the way that her season ends was just really personally gutting. Like, I do not ever watch the last 2 episodes of season 10. Like, I don't think I've watched them again since they aired, which was like 6 years ago. No, 7. Like, it was a long time ago, comparatively, to have, like, for how often I rewatch different episodes of Doctor Who. That one is, those 2 are always ones that I skip. And because it was pretty devastating. I also in terms of representation, I really love having Shooty online on the screen, because I really loved having him as the Doctor, and I loved Jo Martin as the fugitive Doctor. She was actually like, when I first got serious about cosplaying, it was with the fugitive Doctor. That was the first time I actually got serious about cosplaying, and I went to a convention in cosplay for the first time in like nearly a decade with her. And I just like having two like amazing Black actors as the Doctor and really embodying the Doctor in their own ways was really big for me. And I really, Dot and Bubble aside, but I just like to pretend that episode doesn't exist.
Well, we will definitely get to that, to the Dot and Bubble of it all. But I appreciate this reflection, especially on the companions. And it is such a smooth transition into Amanda's essay. So remembering Amanda up on stage. And yeah, thank you, Talia. We're going to talk a bit with Amanda about your writing, which was about the companions specifically, and then bring everybody back together to get into the series 14 of things. All right. So in your essay, you cover a lot of the critiques of Black companions, many of which are based in racial biases and stereotypes, which you examine. But before we get into like the bias, following Talia, I'm curious about the things that you personally love about different Black companions on the show. Do you have a favorite, and where do they shine despite biased or problematic scripts?
All right, for me, I started Doctor Who in 2007, right after Freema left as Martha, which is a very, very awkward time to come into the fandom because it was in between the seasons. Catherine Tan premiered yet as Donna, and there was still a lot of lingering resentment over her character by white Brit fans. There was a lot of racism still in this, but I felt so represented by Martha in ways I'm like, how come y'all don't understand how brilliant she is? Like, she's leaving the TARDIS to have a whole medical career. Like, what is wrong with y'all? like it was, because also she was at a time in my own life. I was in college, like, again, figuring out my career and figuring out like what I want to do with my life. Martha was just, yeah, exactly. Martha is that one. Like, it was just seeing her like saving the whole world. I was like, how come people can't get with this? But then I realized, like, the longer, further apart from Martha's season, like I moved along in fandom, I realized two things. Number one, she came about at a time I don't think the white Brits were ready to like discuss anything about like how Black Brits or anybody else in diaspora like feel about the show. And I also think too, as fans move on to not like or discuss or pick apart other things, like Martha suddenly like, well, Martha's not so bad now that we're like 3, 4, 5 years away from her tenure as a companion. And that actually happens with all the companions at some point. Like, if once a season or era ends and then it's like, oh wait, there's a new thing to criticize about the next person, that now the past doesn't look so bad. That's what ends up happening a lot with, it happened for me. So for me, I'm like, oh wow, this is a really awkward time in fandom that people, and I was still hashing out Martha, and then I'm like now waiting for Donna, and then for a while I was like, I don't think we're gonna get a Black companion again, and then we had Bill, and Bill was just like, oh my god, Bill was transformational for me in a different way, because now there was clearly not a fandom involved in that 10 years since there was clearly a base of more Black fans from across diaspora and queer fans ready to defend her against not so great takes. And you could also see where Bill to me, like, I liked her energy, I liked her curiosity. It was also enlightening to me to see how queer fans felt about her, because again, like, she was at that point the first full-time queer companion, because we've had people pop in and out, like Jack and other people. But yeah, this was
pop up for a day and then
yeah, exactly.
Okay,
So, like, having Bill there all the whole time, and I'm like, and she's had so. And the thing is, I love for Bill's like a lot of my favorite episodes are from her era as well. So it's sort of it just helped. Like it was just fabulous. And then of course the fam, like we had Ryan. I feel like sometimes the fandom doesn't give Ryan a full shake sometimes, and a lot of the feelings that people have to Gaz and Ryan are kind of the same thing. Like again, a lot of Jodie era episodes are a lot of my favorites. Also, Jodie's era has the strongest to me historical episodes out of all of Modern Who. So, yeah, like it's just having these companions of color in plots that I love. Like it's just been fantastic, and like I love all of them for like different ways. I think what I like about Ryan is that he doesn't give up, like despite the barriers I've been placed in front of him in terms of his experience and also too in terms of his disability. Like that was great, and then. Yaz had definitely a different perspective from Ryan in terms of like racial relations because she's representing the South Asian community. So like it was just good to see that on screen. Yeah, again, I agree. Ryan does not get a lot of credit. And the funny thing is being a journalist full time is like I get to see a lot of conversations in real time on a lot of different characters, not just Doctor Who. So sort of like this essay at times was like a mix of drafts I started and stopped and didn't write about. Until I was like, oh, wait, this is finally a place where I could put it all in chronological order. So that's kind of how this draft developed. Like, I probably must have started, like, parts of it, like, since I became a Doctor Who fan all the way back then.
I personally love that reminder to write the things, even if you don't know where they're going to go or when you're going to get back to them. Yep. So note that down, y'all, because it can come together later. So I love Eccleston, but reading your essay reminded me really of how dismissive his doctor was of Mickey's character in the beginning, and it made me think about how different I feel like Ncuti's doctor would respond to like a Mickey, and that I'm basing just based on his interactions we see with like Carla and Cherry, and you know I think. What do I was gonna say? Ruby seems more invested in her parents and her family than Rose seems in Mickey. So, but he was on paper her boyfriend, and so it was interesting to see the doctor just kind of be like, "Get out of my face." Yeah. Anyway, the question in that rambling is. Do you think that that's evidence of growth in Davies' treatment of like our Black supporting characters? Where is there still room for him and all the other writers to grow? But it was interesting to think about, you know, this showrunner and the treatment of Mickey, and then sort of the treatment of the Black supporting characters we have on screen this season.
I think it's different because I think Davies from the beginning with Mickey was using him solely as comic relief in terms of around Rose's family and Rose's desire to not be a normal young adult. Yeah, situationship is the way you describe him. Yeah, I feel like he was writing Rose as sort of like someone who needs to see other people and experience the world, and Mickey was sort of like holding her back. But the thing is that optics looks different on a Black man versus someone who isn't. So I don't think in that era, I'm not sure he was thinking about like the optics of Mickey's being the person holding Rose back from her character development as well thought out. I think now with Cherry and the other members of Ruby's family, we're seeing that like it's clear that they're going to be fleshed out more. You see that it's a less adversarial relationship. It's a very, they support each other, they love each other. There's like, you know, there's definitely like a whole, you know, thing going on there that, yeah, you can see there's some evolution also. Like he's written other shows with other Black characters in years since. I think at some point he has taken some other critiques to heart. But I would say in this, the one thing I noticed about this season is that he has written the 15th Doctor in more of a race neutral way than I would have expected it on paper. I feel like the plot does address these things. I feel like there's still a bit of there needs to be a little bit more of an evolution, like seeing he is non-human, but he also doesn't have some aspects of like what people would expect towards someone of the Black diaspora in the writing. I also think it'd probably just be helpful in terms of overall having more writers of color looking at these things, or even some kind of, again, now that you have Disney going on, you could have folks at Disney look at these things before. And I'm not saying this in sort of a censorship way, but just making sure that like this feels natural and, you know, this is not about quote unquote like changing a character to show. Just this, like, I feel like for some fans of color, this season does not feel as what they would have expected. Because on the interviews, Ncuti said that he wants people to confront the fact that he is Black, but I feel like in the writing doesn't always translate that way.
So you are both a fan and a critic, like you write about Doctor Who, and I'm just curious about how having this new Doctor who is in a Black body, who has all these issues, or, you know, these things that we are bringing up about, like, not necessarily being written from with a Black lens. And I'm just curious how you approach writing about and critiquing this, because we still have a Black Doctor, right? We still have a Black Doctor, but it's also now another level of critique and like question about what this Doctor represents. Once we now we have him there, how are we making sure that he's actually representative of kind of the body that he embodies? Like, he's an alien, right? But he's also a Black man visibly, right? So like, how have you found both covering that and like just the fandom conversations that you've been a part of? Like, what is your experience with that this season?
Oh, ever since writing this essay, I did not expect to be on a Zoom call with Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson, or I also had a separate one with just Millie and I, just because I wrote a feature article about her as well. So I was like, this was crazy. Like, I didn't expect this writing this. I was like, wait, me? Like, this was nuts. So like, so for people who don't know, I freelanced Agenda Geek, and I did their junkets with Doctor Who this season, which was like a crazy good, cool opportunity to be there at the ground level of how Disney was marketing Doctor Who to Americans. It was a crazy cool experience. But at the same time, I noticed that even as a journalist, onto that end, it was very interesting to see how the way the media industry is right now, not as many journalists of color got to talk to them as I would expect it. And I'm not saying that it was something purposeful. I just also think we have to keep in mind that there's a entirely new Disney Plus is building their PR Doctor from entirely scratch, because a different company had it entirely. Like, no notes are taken. There is no transfer of anything. So like, Disney Plus is mostly building from their existing base of, okay, these folks are people who cover our other productions. We'll send them Doctor Who screeners and we'll go from there. Like, they were not really in conversation with as many of the fans and podcasters as people would have expected. So like, yeah, when I looked, because like when I was working on my own things, I was like, I'm not gonna read what anything else that everybody else is like. I noticed a lot of the bylines. I was like, that came out of other junket interviews. I was like, oh wait, most of the folks who talked to him in America were white, and were asking him questions about diversity and stuff. And I was like, this is a little weird coming from a white person asking these questions. But when I went to my interview, I was like, I want to talk character first, and then maybe slide into that later to like make sure people feel comfortable. But like, the way I addressed that, I was like, I want to ask him about like the on-screen diversity, and he said, and I mean behind the scenes, that he did work to get more of that. So I'm assuming we'll be seeing more of that in the second season, because by then they were already starting to work on season 2, I should say season 15 for clarity here. But yeah, it was a lot of things we're talking about not just my essay, there's folks' essays, such as Talia, that are still happening that we can't quite go back to address. So maybe there's room for a second volume. Hopefully, fingers crossed. But yeah,
it was bitch. She said,
I know, right? Yeah, I'm always like, Yeah, I'm the person that always comes up with ideas like 2-3 years from now. Like literally, when I went to that premiere and talked to Millie, like I already want to cover her next show. It's gonna happen in 2026. Sorry, like that's how I think. Like I'm always like thinking about how to analyze things and discuss things in a critical manner.
Well, I love that, and we're going to continue doing that. I'm going to bring Joy and Talia back up. And try to kind of build on so your reflection on sort of, you know, the show, I guess they're changing promotion strategies. There's a new, you know, Disney is now sort of the marketer in other places. But so I think both in terms of this transition and before that, because a lot of the essays were sort of like we've talked about were written before the Shuti announcement, before these changes for the new season. But they discuss like the experience of Whovians in geographical areas outside the US and UK. We spent some time talking about how, especially for like people of color who are into Doctor Who, even in the US, it's sometimes hard to get those opportunities. And so then it was cool to see the section go like, okay, now what if you are a fan in Brazil? What if you are a fan in China? What if you're a fan in Poland? What does that look like and how is it tricky? So that was very interesting to me. And I'm curious about what, if any, experiences you all have had with Whovians in other geographic areas, and any thoughts you have about how we can like better engage in fandom across like language and culture barriers, how we can do some of the work that maybe like these companies are not doing, you know, themselves.
One thing I would just say that I've learned about how people watch Doctor Who in other countries is that it can be very, very hard to watch Doctor Who in other countries, particularly because of Doctor Who being now on Disney Plus everywhere except for the UK. I know my co-host Lucia is Australian, and so she's talked to me about this at length. But it used to be that in Australia you could get the Doctor Who like for free through their ABC, which is the same thing as the BBC, except Australia. And so ABC basically imports a lot of BBC's content basically directly. So you know how like everyone in the UK can just watch Doctor Who with their license, and it used to be the same thing for Australia. However, with Disney Plus, now Doctor Who's on Disney Plus, and it has to be paid for separately when it hadn't before. And then also there's some countries where Disney Plus is just banned, so you just can't watch Doctor Who at all now. And so in some ways, making Doctor Who be on Disney Plus made it more accessible for a lot of people, like in the US, for example. But for people in other countries, it made it like a lot worse and a lot harder. So that is one thing that I've noticed. Also, it can be really hard to find ways to watch classic episodes, especially. Like there's some of these where like finding classic can be almost impossible. And then when you consider too, there's also the fact that even if someone wanted to like buy the DVDs, for example, or like even to send them, like I had some DVDs that I like said to my friend, like, oh, like, you know, I could just send you the like my DVDs. And they're like, well, actually, DVD players are often locked, so you can't play DVDs from other regions. So it's like they can't even, like someone in a different country can't even order the DVDs to watch them away from streaming because like they wouldn't be able to play them. So that's like something that's really interesting in terms of like with this transition, there's also like the access. And I know a lot of people who stopped watching Doctor Who after Capaldi didn't do it necessarily because they disliked Jodie Whittaker, but because her seasons marked a transition also, that it ended up being harder to watch Doctor Who So it's like kind of like a perfect storm too, because people are like, oh, well, people stopped watching Doctor Who with Jodie Whittaker because she's a bad doctor or whatever. And it's like, well, actually, I know a lot of people who stopped watching Doctor Who because they just couldn't anymore, because it was too much effort and it was just their like casual show. And so we see that like a lot of the casual viewership went down because they literally couldn't watch it anymore. And so it's actually something that drives me kind of nuts when people are like, oh, like Doctor Who is back, like RTD is saving everyone. It's like, no, it's just it's more accessible again for a lot of people. And like I said, it's still not accessible for some others, but you know, that's just what I was thinking of it. But be interested to hear what other people have to say as well.
Yeah, to build on what Talia was saying, there's an essay about specifically examining Flux and the broadcast of Flux in Latin America by, I want to make sure I get their names correct, Eloy Vieira and Lilian Franca. And so one of the things that they were examining is the fact that there just seemed to be a lack of interest on the part of BBC in just going to worldwide countries, right? Like going around the globe and promoting the show, which felt really like a marked change because, you know, if everyone thinks back to 2014, Capaldi's first season, they did a world tour. I have the t-shirt. Amanda was there. I know. Like they did a huge thing at the Ziegfeld in Manhattan. I was online for 7 hours, made lots of friends, just to see Capaldi and Jenna Coleman and a screening of Deep Breath. And they went around to cities all over the globe to do this. They were in Mexico, they were in Brazil, they went to Korea, China. Like they really hit all these major countries. And then through budget cuts and stuff, that all that funding, and also BBC America losing funding, which is kind of like a connected but separate entity to the BBC, all of that ability to be promotional dries up, right? So there's this thing that happens where less promotion means less interest from fans, but also that means the fans who are interested have less to work with, right? Because then the show isn't broadcast as much, or maybe like they have less access to it. So I think the essay about Flux in Latin America is really interesting because you get the perspective of people who are directly affected by that. One of the things that my co-producer, Graham Burke, is way better at than I am, is actually really kind of like scouring Twitter and social media for fans who are from like non-English speaking countries. And he's had quite a few of them on the show to just talk about like what their fandom is like, or just, to hear about like, what are your favorite episodes and things like that. He's done a much better job of it than I have, frankly. But we have both, talked about wanting to figure out a way to find more fans in like global majority countries, because we don't, right. It's the language barrier thing you were talking about. Nick had mentioned in the chat, we used to, when I had energy and the bandwidth, we did these virtual meetups, which were so great. And we had somebody attend from Nepal, and he would stay up all night because we were literally doing this in like the dead of night for him. And he would stay up just to connect with other fans of color from all over the world. And it totally blew my mind. And maybe this is like inspiring me to think like, okay, maybe we need to do more things like this where we are actually doing like these real time connections and not just like trying to find people on Twitter, which is not super successful all the time. But I do think that there is a huge opportunity. Ooh, I don't know if I just lost you guys. Hold on.
Technology never.
We still hear you. You're still here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I think I just moved my USB. I think there is a huge opportunity for more connection with fans globally, and definitely a thing to work on.
To piggyback on that point, I think one thing we kind of have to look at is that just because Twitter's gone doesn't mean there's people talking about it elsewhere. We probably have to dig more in TikTok, especially. Obviously, Instagram, the meta apps, even if you were kind of averse to that, depending on your views on Meta, we have to look at a lot of the other social media apps. Also do Discord. There are probably international Who groups on Discord where you just may not be able to access or see depending on language barriers. But there's definitely conversations happening. And I think despite all the streaming wars and licensing and things like that, I think this new era is a good opportunity for international fans to hop on board, even if the earlier years are not as accessible, depending on what's happening. Because some of the issues with Doctor Who viewing is actually outside of Doctor Who's purview or BBC's purview, depending on what the situation is, because they couldn't count on HBO Max in America losing a whole bunch of their things because the CEO is like wants to gut the whole network for cash. Like they can't control that. Like, so that's because and for Americans, like obviously everything from Eccleston through Whitaker is still for now on HBO Max, but like they can't control that. Like streaming wars are kind of inevitable, and but the great thing about the internet is that there are ways to share content and views on Doctor Who matters, like moving the venue essentially. Like that's where I think we have to do is also to scour TikTok, because sometimes and scour like Discords. Like I think there's conversations happening in places we're just not seeing.
Thank you all. Sorry, we were trying to figure out logistics. Nick, I'm going to do the next one, and then maybe if Joy has to go, she can put her response to that third one in the chat, and we can read it out, if that makes sense. But so the next question is really just about, we've talked a bit about like the new era. Amanda, that was really I appreciate your reflection on like this new era gives us an opportunity to connect in new ways and to build like the fandom in new ways. Thinking about the show itself, the ways that like fans can influence the show, or if we are kind of loud about what we want to see, sometimes it gets picked up, sometimes it doesn't. What is a development you would like to see in sort of the Doctor Who universe or the text of the show? What is something you would love to see in this Who era? I'm sure there's a lot, but inviting everyone to share like one or two things.
I mean, I'm a broken record on this because I feel like I say this anytime this question comes up. I really just want more new voices behind the scenes. We did not get that this year for vague reasons. I don't think Russell ever kind of like successfully answered the question as to why he and Moffat are basically the only people who wrote this season, with the exception of Kate Herron and Bryony Redmond. There are new writers, more new writers coming in for next year, and new directors, thank goodness. But I think that if you think about the past 10 years of the show, some of the best episodes come from the folks who are newer voices and younger, people who grew up with the modern show, not classic Who. God love them. And I love the classic show. I love my friends who are fans like True Blue from the classic era, but the show thrives on diversity, right? On diversity of storytelling, diversity of voice, genre, style, all of that. And so if we're only getting the same kind of writing from the people who have the same perspective over and over and over again, it is stale. And, this is how you get into problems like you see with Dot and Bubble, where I think like I applaud the effort. Great that they tried, but also like this adherence to the Doctor as the Doctor being alien and not really thinking beyond like, well, what does it mean to have the Doctor say the thing that they would probably say in any other scenario when they were white, right? Like that kind of thinking is not going to happen with somebody who just is not really equipped to have that in their mindset. And so I want new people. Always new people.
Yeah, echoing that is exactly what I was thinking. I like you were saying, like, so I understand that a large part of it was the pandemic, but the fact that like between like before Rogue, the last episode that wasn't co-written by either RTD, Moffat, or Chibnall was Haunting of Villa Diodati, which is like I think the antepenultimate episode of series 12. So that is like, and that came out in 2020. So it's been literally 4 years since we had an episode come out that was not written or co-written by one of the 3 modern Who showrunners. And that's a problem. I mean, like I said, I understand, like, with the pandemic, like, Chris Chibnall, like, and the issues with Flux. Like, I remember Flux was supposed to be, like, 8 episodes, ended up being 6. There was that whole thing. I honestly applaud him for having Doctor Who get through COVID and all that. But also, like, really, this was this whole season being written by RTD and Moffat, and then like one non-showrunner written episode. I feel like I don't like that.
Amanda, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I also agree about writers. I do feel like I think the best work comes from new folks. I would also like to see writers that do not have science fiction experience try to work with the Doctor. Although we got a little bit of that with Rogue, because the 2 screenwriters for Rogue, they have worked on some sci-fi stuff. They haven't done, and they've done some other not sci-fi things. I would just love to see somebody who has no sci-fi experience walk in and write Doctor Who. Part of obviously is my bias because I love period dramas. I'm like, I would love to see some of the period drama folks like take a stab at Doctor Who for reasons. Obviously the whole like writer's collar thing is huge. That's a huge institutional problem way beyond Doctor Who, period. But the part that is in my essay, it's also too long to get into here. But another thing I'd love to see in terms of Shuti's era, I'd love to see a historical set somewhere in Africa before slavery. And see where that goes in terms of that. Yeah,
I love that.
There's a lot of places they can go before that, and they don't have to deal with that. And again, another opportunity for a writer of color to step in. There's a lot of mythology. You could have aliens interfering and all sorts of things, and folks just reacting in different ways than like the usual, like, oh no, we're stuck somewhere in England.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to think about the Rogue writers as like not necessarily writing sci-fi all the time, because I feel like that episode had a lot of there was like timey-wimey stuff going on in that episode. You know, there was a lot of cool,
I think that's all to make the
point,
not
right?
sci-fi happen, right? So they just like, we'll figure out how they get there. But I think that's that framework of like, I'm not writing a sci-fi story. I'm writing a story, and then we're using the sci-fi to get them to that place where they can have this story. And I think that's a big difference, speaking to what Amanda's saying. Like, people are not coming from the sci-fi brain of like, I got to make this timey-wimey cool. It's like, no, I just want to make a really fun romance story. I want to make a really fun historical. And then it's like, okay, now how do we get there? That's where you add the sci-fi, right? So I think that's a really great, like, an act. Because I've always said, like, Doctor Who can literally go anywhere, anytime, any place. How do we keep it up in semi-modern London, or you know what I mean? Like, why are we still in the UK? Like, you could go literally anywhere. Like, there are so many. We have continents, even other continents. Any of them, pick one, pick any other continent. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the whole of Asia, like, so much history in Africa and Asia that you just have never tapped. Especially, I mean, you tried a couple times and like.
Yeah, it didn't go well when they went to Asia.
I'm just like, we're gonna forgive y'all transgressions because that was the past, and we try to let y'all have it. But like, no, literally. So, I think all those things together need to happen, right? You need to both have writers of different, diverse backgrounds, and that's race, that's able-bodiedness. You know what I mean? Like everything, like all of these experiences change your interpretation of the world, like how you move around the world. And so, having people that just have varying experiences in general, but also just like not focusing on the fact that this is sci-fi. Because I think even in the historical show, a lot of the funner episodes are like they're trying to teach you a history, and they're like, okay, the Doctor just landed in this historical moment, and it's like if a person writing that is coming from a place of like, I want to teach this history, I want to show this thing, that story is gonna be good because they're just trying to tell that story, and then we're just going to the answer to why and how they got there is the sci-fi TARDIS. That's the answer. We don't need more than that for the sci-fi. You don't have to explain it. Just drop them there and let the episode happen. So I think all of these answers are kind of one, like we just need diversity in voice, like both in your relationship to like, you know, sci-fi and also just your background.
Yeah. I also would love them to continue thinking about diversity on screen in different ways. We have obviously, as folks have pointed out, made some progress, but something we were talking about in our last TARBIS episode, I think it was the last one, was just like how there's just so many folks, especially in the last few episodes, that Lord, why is my brain blanking now?
Talk about like the like attractive, like
yeah, but there's a term that what is the term that my brain is now blanking on? Wasting time that we don't have. It's fine. But they're just like attractive by like, you know, normal society standards and whatnot.
right.
And they have the doctor.
Oh, you mean when you said that guy was too cute to go?
No,
that, like, that is not that. Don't do that. No, but we're just making a point of like noticing that like.
No,
oh,
I
like,
know what you meant. I thought that was what you were referring to.
Like societally attractive, right? So there's not a lot of, we say body diversity, and there's multiple levels to that. But I also think like making a conscious choice to
bring it up because one of the essays in the section, you know, the one about sort of like queering characters, which is really cool in general, talks about how like there were some fans who you know, were questioning whether part of the reason they never even like had any sort of type of romance between like the Doctor and Donna, because Donna comes on after Rose, which is like a whole thing, and then Martha, who I think we're supposed to believe is like crushing on the Doctor throughout, but that's not really the energy for her, is that like Donna is like bigger, which, you know, I did not think of Donna as like a fat character, like that representation for me, but she is bigger than you, right? And so it's just crazy even to think
and
about
she's
like
a little
that
older
as a valid,
too.
right? She's a little bit older. She's got a different body shape, and how that might like that might have been a statement on like attractiveness and like who the Doctor's attracted to. And then we have this season, we have a very like cute Doctor, right? And everyone the Doctor hits on, which is sort of in the same sort of aesthetic frame. So anyway, all of that to say, the very simple thing that I would like is to see the Doctor flirting with a fat person, making a fat person of color make me even happier. Just, you know, have it be part of the story. We could go back to Mr. Rowe. We can find him in the vortex or wherever he's at. He's cute too. He can come back through. But I know, I just
that I'm like, I don't mind seeing more of, which is wild. Shout out to them for that. I was like, oh
yeah, shout out to Rogue for that. Yeah, that's just simple. But
I want to see that as well, because I feel like we got this fine Doctor, which is canonical, because everybody's like, damn, he fine everywhere they go. So it's like, it's, you know, except for the racist planet, whatever. But like,
cute,
for the most part, yeah. But it's like, this is like,
it is funny to see everyone in episodes.
The camera,
like, oh.
The production agrees. It's not like subjective in this matter. They're like, this is a very attractive Doctor. Everybody
across alien species are all
right. Like, to be clear, I don't want like we don't want to. Y'all can't feel how y'all feel about this Doctor or that Doctor, but this is canonical fact that this Doctor is attractive.
Let her know. I feel like this means, right, that our like Stacey's got a good chance for her alien abduction dreams. Apparently, Doctor Who was telling us that like Black folks are high up there, like attractive.
we out there.
And oh man, a whole mess.
But so where we at? Okay. So Amanda and Talia both cite my good self in their essays. And Talia also cites Sky Jones and Rebecca Farron, who is in our chat today. Hi, Rebecca. And they're all, you know, B&C fandom friends. Like, we're all kind of in the same community. So we wanted to build on that and invite all of our guests to like Shout out additional fandom voices or spaces that inform your experience and critique of Doctor Who in this era.
Well, I don't necessarily have any other spaces to give a special shout out to, because I feel like you all are my community, especially like I said before, I've taken a little bit more of a step back from just engaging in, you know, the general public social media spaces. But I will say that a friend joked with me. He saw my post about this, or your post about like the podcast, and he was like, "What are you doing on this?" He did not read the caption. He doesn't know. And I was like, well, first of all, it's about, you know, a thing that I did, and I was like, but I think the Black Nerds community has always been so welcoming and inclusive, and felt like such a safe space for me as just a fan of color, and being able to have a space where I felt like I can be able to express frustrations with the show, but also be understood as like coming from a place of love, right? Like, as we discussed, like, it's not that I don't have to worry about someone trying to convince me that what I saw or felt is wrong. And I think you all have done such a good job of creating that kind of space. And so despite my friends' confusion, I was like, no, this is a space where I feel very like seen and welcomed. And so I'm just giving you like I'm giving you all a shout out, because like you all have been a super important like community for me.
Love that. Thank you.
Yeah, very similarly, y'all have been a very important community. Most of my friends that are Doctor Who friends, I met through BNC, and most of my friends that I consider like to be good friends in general, I met through BNC. And like, you know, like the podcast Lucia and I have, we made it because we met here. And like it's y'all have been like honestly a very foundational like grounding group for me, just in terms of Doctor Who, but also just in terms of like my mental health. And I have to say, most of my other like online spaces that I interact on, a lot of them, like to the extent that they're Doctor Who, like I have made a lot of friends like through Gallifrey 1, which I only went to because y'all convinced me. And now I go every year, but it was definitely that. And then also I've made a few friends through Doctor Who, through TikTok cosplay stuff on Doctor Who. But yeah, I have to say, like, in terms of like Discord servers and like places where I hang out, this is like the main one that I spend time in. I'm also in a few like Good Omens servers, but like in like MCU stuff, but that's like different because it's not Doctor Who. Yeah.
Okay, for me, BNC has been foundational in some aspects of my career, of like kind of thinking about like where I want to go and what I've been doing, and like just support in like supporting my my intense energy on the show. Yeah, I would. It also has been helpful for me as somebody who writes about Doctor Who professionally to have a space where folks respect the fact that, yes, I can't say certain spoilers because Disney has made me sign on a dotted line. With every screener, they sent a NDA. And I'm like, don't ask me things. We can talk about what already aired on Plus. Don't ask me future things. Y'all expected that the most. I appreciated that. And just, yeah, it's great to be like, I don't have to explain to folks about how I feel about their show. Like, for example, Dot and Bubble is my least favorite episode of the season. I was not as angry at some aspects. I realized, okay, RTD did not write this of Black folks entirely in mind. It's like kind of decreased my anger about that episode a little bit compared to other folks. But I know other folks needed that space to have that place to vent, because when I looked at Twitter, all those reactions were like, oh, that was the best episode ever. And I'm like, you didn't notice the whole point of the racism, clearly. You thought it was just a class thing. Like, yeah, in some cases, it was just like weird. It was, again, like why we were here, because like folks of color could just vent in this place and not understand it. It was not we're hating the show. We just could see where it could go better. like it needed to do better in some regards to make it more realistic for people of color, and that was fantastic. I also have two other kind of big in real life communities that I also have to shout out. I have to shout out everybody at Galley who's been helping me along as well, because I've had a lot of amazing opportunities and like networking and just career stuff, and just be having like a whole 200 bajillion best friends. I also have to shout out the LA Who community, because that's where I first started Doctor Who fandom, all the way back in cosplay, like many years ago, because like that's been a space to in real life where like I have a whole bunch of friends there, and we go to all different cons together and stuff. Like they've also helped me like in real life spread a word, even something as simple as just like spamming their friends on Facebook my article links. They've all been like in different ways helping me through this crazy time of living my dreams, essentially. Because like when I started 2007, I did not expect us to be talking about a Black Doctor. Here we are. And like here we are. And then for me, myself personally, like just all people call her seeing a doctor who looks like them on screen. Like for me, I'm like, wait a second, I met Shuti in LA, like at Doctor Premiere. I'm like, what is happening? If you told me that in 2007, it would be insane. Like I would not have thought that happened. I'm like, part of that's possible is because of the fandom itself growing. Like the fandom has grown, and these spaces have made it possible for like BBC to realize, yeah, we need to open up the world of Doctor Who to more people and make it not just a slogan, make it a reality.
Hey. Nick, any thoughts on, or anybody you want to promo? Plug Black TARDIS.
I do Black TARDIS, so I just talk a lot of mess. I'm gonna be honest. I don't want to like put extras on it. I just like to talk mess, especially when now that we have a Black Doctor, it's every episode but broadly, I just talk about representation, especially from my Black American lens. But in general, a POC. So, you know, you can come to me if you want to hear angry, generally, unfortunately, discussions about Doctor Who. But in general, I think a lot of people find me and find each other through Black TARDIS. So that would be my main point of like, oh, if you come to my page, chances are you will find people interacting with me who are also fans of color, and that's another way to connect with each other. So that would be my main thing of like, come to me for that reason. Like, otherwise you're just getting just hostility, and I can admit that about myself. But yeah, add Black TARDIS on Twitter. And I think I have everything linked there, so that's just the easiest way. That's awesome. Just BNC, of course.
Of course.
Of course.
This is the last episode of season 5, but we're not leaving somehow. Make sure you are following BNC pages and or in our Discord for information on another round of Blue Ballot Box. Those who have been rocking with us for a while know that is like a show segment where we're going to go back through some of the older seasons. Y'all are going to vote on the episodes that you want us to go back and review again, and we're going to have a ball. So there will be at least one Blue Ballot Box episode each month leading up to the Christmas special that will give us more Shuti on our screen. And also, only doing one episode per month frees us up for more guest spots on your pod. If you would like to have Nick and or myself come through, we are trying to do this work that we've been talking about today of like building more fan connections, really making sure that there's a variety of voices represented in Who fandom in the 21st century, and boosting up each other's projects. So reach out, let us know. If you enjoyed this live stream and would like to have access to more TARBIS live recordings, you can sign up to support Black Nerds Great on Patreon. You'll also get access to behind the scenes content from our other collective projects, like Wizard Team. You can learn more about Black Nerds Create at blacknerdscreate.com, and you can come kick it with us in the Black Nerds Create Discord server, which has gotten lots of shout outs today. We're on the site formerly known as Twitter at BLK Nerds Create, and everywhere else at Black Nerds Create. Talk to us on socials using the hashtag TARBIS and let us know how you're engaging with the Doctor Who fandom. And give some love to Joy, Amanda, and Talia. Thank you all so much for being with us today.
Thank y'all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.